Hey, happy Friday. Welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph, a senior developer advocate with Appsmith. And in this workshop, we're going to build a QR code generator using a custom widget and the QRCode.JS library. Now, I spent some time testing this library, and it's really easy to just feed it a text string of a URL and turn that into a QR code that you can display in your app. Uh, it's it's really simple and probably not worth doing a video just on that one thing. But I realized that it's a little harder to get that image out of the custom widget so that you can use it in the next step. Because you probably don't want to just show a QR code to your end user of the app. It's more useful to generate that image and then save it back to a database or an API and do something else with it, like a mass email or a text for your business. Might put it on a invoice or something on your website, but just showing it in your app isn't quite as useful, and that's the easy part. So what we're going to do today is use that custom widget and the QR code JS library to first generate the image and then extract the data, the actual file of that image outside of the custom widget so that you can send it off to that API, add it to an email, or save it back to a database and be able to reuse it and actually have that file outside of the custom widget. So that's the tricky part. That's what we'll focus on today. Again, we're going to be using the QR code JS library from Lori Luis on GitHub. I found this library originally on JS Deliver and then looked back at the repo, and I just wanted to give a shout out to Lori for making this repo open source. We're going to use it today in our custom widget so that anyone can add QR codes to their app. All right, let's check it out. Okay, first I wanted to take a minute to show you where I found this library, why I chose it, and basically if you're trying to do the same thing, build a new custom widget, and you're trying to pick a library and get it working in a custom widget, just to show that kind of general process. So I like to use this JS Deliver site. It's I think the most popular content delivery service for JavaScript libraries. And so I just searched for QR code. And the most popular one here, it's the first one I tried. It was easy to actually get it working, and I went with it. So, I mean, I don't always go with the first one. I'll look at how many downloads, check out the repo, but this was the first one I tried, and it was really easy to use. So you can see this one has almost 70 million downloads, whereas the next one's only about 3, and this one is just a reader. So it's by far the most popular one here, and it looked pretty easy to use. So um, most of these, they're going to have some examples here, just the basics of how to get it working. And if you just cut and paste this into a custom widget, that'll get you pretty close. Sometimes that's all you have to do. You might have to change one or two things to get the rest of the app talking to it, but this one looks pretty straightforward. So it was the first one I tried, and just want to give a shout out to the authors here. So if you check this out on GitHub, and the one I'm using here is from Lori Luis. This is the one that has the most downloads. And this is a user from Estonia here. So thank you for making this open source. I noticed that it says it's forked here from another repo. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the other dev here as well. Both these are like really old, haven't been updated in a while, but they seem to work fine. So the other dev here, David, here we go. Yeah, so David from South Korea. So Luis and David, thank you both for contributing the code here, making these open source and easy to use. So what I'm going to do is take the install link here. Before we get into the basic usage down there, we want to make sure we import the script. So I'm copying the HTML from the default version here. There's also the ESM, and you can copy this as the entire thing here with the HTML, or you can do just this line and do this in the custom widget on the JS side. So let's see, let's start out dragging in a new custom widget. So I have an empty app here and dragging in a custom widget. And then we're going to go to the edit source. All right, now it comes preloaded with all this stuff. You can see the format here, import whatever from some link. So I'm going to clear all that out. And there's that QR code, so the ESM version of the import. We can try that or the HTML version. So we'll start with that and we'll test out this. So we define a div with an ID of QR code and then use this new QR code on that element with that URL. So we'll come back here to the HTML. Okay, it says QR code is not defined. So that means that it's trying to call this QR code function and it's not seeing that library available. So instead of that ESM import here, I'm going to try the HTML one. I usually go for this first, but I just wanted to show if you do get the error, try the other version. And so if I import this up here, there it is. So you just have to have a line to import the script and then copy and paste in that most basic example, and it works out of the box. There's nothing extra that I had to modify here from their example to get it working. But we are going to change a couple things here so that we can pass in the URL. I want to make this dynamic and be able to tell it, from this row of data, generate a QR code using the URL in some column. So let's go back to the docs, and that was the most basic example there. Here's with some options. So you still tell it what div that you're targeting, and then instead of just a URL or text, you have the text property itself, and then you can also give it these other properties for the width and height and color. So I'm going to copy all of this, and we can replace that right here in the script tags. So instead of this line, which is working, I'm going to replace that with the other example. And now we're getting an error and it's not rendering because this is the ID of the element that you're trying to turn into a QR code. And for whatever reason, they did not use the same ID for both these examples. This one is QR code for the ID. So I'm going to copy that. And this one just called it test, but we don't have a div called test. So if I change this, all right, so we have it working again. And now there is this config object, which means we can change the size. If you want to make like a high res one or change any options like that. Change the color here if you want. So now I'm going to take this config object and pull this out of here and just call it config. And we will make a variable up here. Const config equals that config. Oh, here we go. Okay, this is all working, but I'm doing it on the HTML side here. And it's all inside of script tags. I'm actually going to start moving this over to the JavaScript side now because we're no longer just copying and pasting their examples. We're writing a bunch of code here. So I can put that on the JS side. Okay, that's working again. And we do not need these script tags now. So you can see the HTML is nothing other than importing the script and then a single div with an ID. And then here we have the config, and just by defining this QR code variable with a new QR code, you tell it the ID and it just initializes it. But we're getting an error. It says missing Appsmith on ready. So your custom widget should have an Appsmith on ready function, which takes a function as a parameter. So you'll notice that before I added that, we have a warning saying that we should have an Appsmith on ready function. This will make sure the rest of the app is finished loading in case you're passing in data. You might have an API that runs on page load and you have to wait for that to finish so you can get the data and send it into the custom widget and then do something else with that, like generate a QR code from the URL. And so what we want to do is put our code inside of an Appsmith onReady. Now that I paste this in here, I no longer have that error, but it says it expects a function as a parameter. So the thing inside here should be another function, and then that's what it will do when Appsmith is ready. That's the callback. So there's an arrow function, and inside of it, I'm just going to run this one line. We can keep the config outside of the onReady because this stuff is just hard-coded at this point. It's just some data that we're initializing it with. So that's working. Now we want to change this value. I want to pass in a URL. So let's go back to the rest of the editor. And I'm going to add an input. So when I type something in here, I want to take that text, which will probably be a URL, and rerun the function to generate this QR code based off of this text. So we can try to pass the value directly from input 1 into the model here. And we're not actually using the model yet. So this is the default model. This is a place to pass in data to the custom widget, and you can modify it, and then the custom widget can react to that. So I'm going to clear this out. All right, we want to pass in an object, and it will have a URL. And then I want the custom widget to take this URL that we pass in, turn it into this image, and then save that image and send it back out of the custom widget so we can do something with it. So we're going to include our URL, and then we want to return the QR code. So I'm just setting this up as like an initial object that it's expecting that there's always those properties there. And then I'll just take the URL of this app and I'll put that here. So that's the URL we'll start with. And then we want to return a data URL, which is a string that represents the entire image. And then you can save that back to the database and be able to use it in an email or whatever else you want to do with it. Okay, so now let's see if we can use this URL inside the custom widget. First is just getting it to reference this and do something with it, but then we have to like make it live so it keeps updating. So it gets a little tricky. It's really easy to get the basics just displaying just to show the QR code, but to try to make it all interactive like this got a little tricky, so it seemed worth doing a video on here. So now I'm going to use the Appsmith model here. So we'll set this equal to the Appsmith model URL. And it is not rendering, but that's outside of the onReady. So let's see if we wait for Appsmith to be ready. Cool. Okay. So that's the difference. You can do some things outside of there, and it worked when it was hard coded. But as soon as I tried to make it a dynamic value that I'm passing in, it had already looked up here, defined the constant, didn't see anything, and so it's defined as an empty string. And then it doesn't matter if it updates later. It wasn't responding to it. So to make that wait for that first instance of it, you need that onReady. Now let's see what happens when we change it. So if I want to take this URL property here and be able to change it when I type right here, there's a couple ways I could do it. We could just reference the input right here, but we might actually have to send it to a variable first and then mutate it. So we'll try the input first. We're just going to reference input1.text, and that's not triggering it to rerun, but it should be updating the model. Let's see. This is the default model. So it's part of the definition of the custom widget, but it's not the live model. If we go here, we can see the live model. And so that has, you know, the text that I just put there. Whereas this one, let's see, if I change it again and then select over here. Okay, so the live model does see the changes. That's important. Before you start trying to build functionality that is going to respond to those changes, make sure that you can even see those changes over here in the live model, that it's reactive and like detecting that change. So sometimes you have to use like a variable or a Appsmith store, depending on where the, you know, what part's changing, and if the custom widget isn't seeing it, you might have to force that. But it looks like it sees the change when we type. Now, we want to respond to those changes. So that's another function like onReady, only it's on model update. So appsmith.on model change, sorry, on model change. When the model changes, we'll have another function inside of here. And then what do we want to do? Let's go look at the docs again, because I think there's a method for this. You can do QRCode.clear and then make code and give it a value. And this will regenerate using the same div that this was originally defined with. So QR code is just a name. It's a variable that was defined right here, and it's using that one div. You know, here it was test, up here it's QR code. So we got a variable name and an ID name. It's, you know, they're the same. It's a little confusing, but the point is, you know, you can clear an existing one by its name after you've defined it, and then you can use this make code and feed it a new URL. And I think it's going to keep the rest of the config stuff. So I'm going to try just clearing it and giving it a URL instead of the entire config. So back here inside the onModel change, I want to be able to reference this QR code, and all of this is inside the onReady. So I'm just telling it what to do on model change right off the start. In the onReady, I'm going to define the onModel change. So in here, what we'll do is reference that QR code again and say .clear, and then make code using, we're going to take it straight from the Appsmith model again, instead of the config where it was already defined once, because that's a const. It's not going to change, and it's only once at the very beginning. I want to get the most recent version of it straight from the model. All right. I think it might be ready to actually test and respond when we type. Let's see. Yeah, cool. All right, we're like halfway there. It is responding to the typing, and you can generate a QR code, but how do you get the image out of there? So we're sending in something to the model. It responds when we change it, but every time we change it, I want to send something back here to the model. So remake the code, and then what if we just update the model right here? Let's add our semicolons here, and then we'll say appsmith.update model, and keep an eye on the console over here. So if I tell it to update the model, and I send it an object with that QR code property, so it is going nuts. It's the infinite loop here. I am updating the model when the model changes, which triggers the onModel change, which updates the model, and it's just going on forever. So in order to get this back and forth, so I can send in the URL, have it generate a new QR code, and send it back out without this like runaway constant update thing going on. I did this once with an API call in there, and I locked myself out again of ChatGTP. I hit my limit. So if you want to be able to get that to not loop like that, you need to know what side updated it last. Did it come from inside the custom widget or outside? So I'm going to call it platform for the edits that come from outside or maybe user. And then inside the custom widget, we'll call it custom. So what I want to do is when I update the model, I'm going to give it that image URL that we're trying to send out. And I'm going to say, you know, who's here, who's sending the data. And then when we send in the URL, we want to do the same thing and say, hey, this is a URL from the user. So go ahead and do that on model change thing. But we don't want an infinite loop that like keeps doing it, you know, every single time. So I won't update the model every time the model changes, only if it's data coming in from the user. So right here, I'm going to say if something is true, then go ahead and do this stuff. And that thing is going to be a new property that we'll pass in here. So what we'll take the live model and we'll have a property that says source, and if the source is user. So if appsmith.model.source equals user. Now, it doesn't even exist yet. I haven't declared this. I'm looking for something that's not there. So it should not run this stuff when I type now. It's no longer re-rendering because that condition isn't true yet. So the default model is the very first time around. And I do want it to render that time. But then every time that we update the model, we're going to change it and say, nope, it's not user anymore. Now it's the custom widget doing the update. So I think I want the first time to already say user. So source, user. Okay, it's updating again. If the source equals the user, clear it and then re-render. But it's not doing the infinite loop thing. Oh, I'm not updating the model again yet. Okay. So if it equals user, update the model, but we'll change it. It won't be user anymore. So I'm going to define this object first instead of doing it right inside of there. New const new model equals an object. And then we'll have the QR code that we're trying to pass out of the custom widget. And the source will no longer be user. It'll be custom widget. And now we can safely update the model. And when on model change gets triggered again in that infinite loop, it should fail this test and it should only re-render as we're typing if we reset it to user. So now for the QR code part, the thing that we're trying to send back out, that's going to look something like this. Data, image, base 64, and then just some data. So we'll figure that part out in a minute of how we actually get the image from it. But I want to make sure that I can send in some data. It updates it and changes as I type, and then sends back out this, something that looks like a data URL. And then we'll actually get that part working and swap it out, and I think we'll have everything working. So, okay, let's see. Let's go back out. Oh, wait, not quite there. I defined it, but I didn't save it to the model. No, update model. See if we're going to get an infinite loop here again. So that I want to send a new model. Okay, no loop. I think that's good. Okay. Oh, neat. I don't have to reset the source because I'm changing input one.text, and I think it might send in the whole new model. And did the QR code come out? So the default model is static in a sense that this is a dynamic reference to a widget, but this is all static, and so that's just getting reset with the widget. I want to see if this QR code is there in the live model. It's not there in the default model, but it is in the live model. So I can look at that over here. Inside custom one, model QR code. Cool. Now, the last piece is to really extract the image itself as a data URL and put that in place here. And then that should display in an image widget. So this same string that I'm looking at here from the custom model QR code, that should render as an image once I get the right string there. So we're getting really close. It is reactive as I type. We no longer have the infinite loop. Yeah, just have to get the image out of there. All right. Now this next part isn't in their docs. It was a little tricky to figure out, but it's just basic HTML and JavaScript stuff, and it's not like specific to their docs. So what I was able to do is access the canvas that is used to render this, and then use the to data URL function and extract that. So if you check out the docs here in JS Deliver, it says that this library is using the HTML5 canvas. And you target some element on the DOM, and then it generates a canvas inside of there for the image. Now, if you check out the docs here for the canvas element, there is this toDataURL method. And this takes the canvas that's inside of that element that you're using toDataURL on, and it gives you back an image with whatever type. So I'm able to specify a type of image PNG, select that element, and convert it to an image. And then we can save that back to the model. So again, this isn't in the docs. It was kind of pieced together and got a little help from ChatGTP, and now we got it working. So I want to share it with everybody here. Let's go back to the custom widget here. And so we want to save that data URL right here, which will then let us display it here and save it back to a database and do whatever else with it. So let me see, get inside the custom widget here. Okay. In the on-model change, every time the model is updating, we want to keep saving back that QR code. But here, I just threw in a placeholder, so I need to actually get that value. So I'm going to call this QR image, and this will be equal to, we will look at the toData URL from that canvas. We have to find the canvas first and then use toData URL on it. So it would be QR code dot query selector. Inside of that element, find a canvas, and then use toData URL on it. And it should be image PNG. I think that was the format we saw here. So you can give it a type, and that would be a file format like this. And this is a method on the canvas element. So inside the QR code, find a canvas, and then toData URL. Let's see if that updates now. Oh, okay. I defined it as an image, but I didn't use it here. I got to actually send that value back out. QRCode.querySelector is not a function. How about we just get the whole document instead of inside of that one? Hey, there it is. Look at that. Whoa, okay. Now, I don't need to see the text version anymore because that's working. So we'll delete that, which push this way down. And we'll change this to contain so we can see all of it. Sweet. All right. So now the image is outside of the custom widget. This widget, image 1, is able to see the entire data URL, and you can do something with it outside of the custom widget. So that was pretty tricky. Like the getting it reactive while I type, like that one wasn't too bad. But then I got that infinite loop thing when I want it to update as I type, but not to always update the model every time the model changes. And then that bit there at the end, that you can use the query selector, find a canvas, and then use toData URL. Like I said, that's not in the, I didn't see that in the docs there. There's not a direct like explanation of how you pull out an image, but that's just the normal method that is available on any canvas. And this library uses the HTML5 canvas. So put a couple things together there and was able to extract the image and get it to where you can really do something with it now outside of the custom widget. So that's it for this workshop. There's a ton more you can do with this. Now that you have the image as a data URL, you can go ahead and connect this to a query, save it back to the database, send it in the email, whatever you want to do. It could go in a text message. So like I said, that's it for this week. If you got ideas for other workshops or any questions on this one, feel free to drop a comment below. Thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.